Hello, my name is Dr. Cleo Rolle, and I would like to welcome you to our video series on the scientific insights into COVID-19. And in this video series, what we are discussing is the last 6 months of research that has been conducted about the disease and how that has led to our understanding of the disease. In this particular video, I'll be discussing when we can expect to have a vaccine available for the general population. And so the importance of vaccination and why we are waiting patiently for a vaccine is that with a vaccine, it would allow our immune systems to be prepared for an encounter with the virus, meaning that if we were to get infected after we've been vaccinated, we would mount an effective immune response that would limit some of the deadly symptoms that are associated with COVID-19 disease in some individuals. And so when we have a population of individuals, all of whom have never encountered the virus before, and if one person in that population becomes infected, shown here in green, the virus is then able to rapidly spread throughout the population because all of the people in that population are now susceptible to disease and will eventually become infected once they encounter the virus. If we vaccinate that same population of people, shown here in black, and then somebody in that population becomes infected, now there's less likelihood that that virus will spread throughout the population. And the people who are vaccinated would kind of serve as a shield for those who are not vaccinated. And so this is referred to as herd immunity. And in order to achieve herd immunity under classical circumstances, about 60 to 70% of the population needs to be vaccinated or immune to the virus. There is current data to suggest that this might be lower for SARS-CoV, although we are not quite sure. So we're still working with the standard that about 60 to 70% of the population needs to be vaccinated in order for the population as a whole to be protected from the spread of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And so when somebody becomes vaccinated, essentially, as I mentioned before, you are preparing the immune system to be able to respond if you ever encounter the pathogen that you were vaccinated against. And so how vaccination works, if you're focusing on the immune response, is that once you have introduced the virus or the vaccine into an individual, that individual's antigen presenting cells take up that virus or vaccine particle, and then it's able to activate or turn on the helper T cell, which acts similar to a quarterback on a football team, and it then directs the activities of the other immune cells. And so on one hand, those T helper cells are then activating and telling the cytotoxic T cells, which are the cells that actively destroy viral infected cells. So they are getting those cells prepared to attack. And on the other hand, they are activating B cells, which produce antibodies. And these antibodies are protective because they are able to bind to the virus and prevent the virus from infecting any additional cells. And once the body or the individual has cleared the virus, some of these cells hang around as memory cells so that if you encounter the virus again, then you already have these cells armed and ready to go. And so this is the goal of vaccination, to generate a population of memory cells that are armed and ready to go should you ever encounter the virus. And so when we are designing vaccines, there are a couple of different approaches that one can take. And so on one hand, you can take the approach where you use the entire virus or some part of the virus that you've attached to a modified virus. And so I'll walk you through some of these examples. And so the first part is to take a virus that you're interested in designing a vaccine for and treat that virus in some way that makes it unable to cause an infection. So it still goes through the same activities of priming the immune system, but it can't cause any of the diseases. And so that is a whole virus type vaccine. And you might be familiar with those in some of the vaccines, such as the flu vaccine is an attenuated form of the virus or weakened form of the virus. On another hand, we can take a virus that doesn't cause severe symptoms and modify it to express parts of the current virus that we're wanting to protect against on that less harmful virus. And so our immune system is activated because we are giving it a virus, and we are directing the immune response against the part of the virus, shown here in blue, that we want to prime and get our immune cells ready to see. These types of viruses, based on the viral particles or virions, are advantageous because it allows the host immune cells to develop immune responses to multiple parts of the virus. We can also take the parts of the virus that we know are critical for its ability to infect and use that as a way to stimulate an immune response. And so these are considered viral subunit vaccines. And these can either be a part of the virus known as the spike protein, which is important for entry of the virus into the host cells, or associated M proteins. Or we can take parts of the genome or parts of the nucleic acids that are important for making these viral subunits and use those to prime or vaccinate an individual. And we'll revisit some of these types of vaccines later in the talk. And so currently there are about 150, give or take a few, vaccines that are being investigated for the SARS-CoV-2 infection. And most of those vaccines are in preclinical testing. And a small amount of those vaccines, about 10, are in phase 1 trials, 8 are in phase 2 trials, and 3 are in phase 3 trials. And I'll walk you through what each of these phases are in a second. And so the goal is to get vaccines through phase 3 trials, and at this point, once they are approved by the FDA, they will be ready to administer to the general public. And so how do we get from coming up with an idea for a vaccine all the way until the approval process when it's ready to be administered to the population? And so we start off with preclinical testing. And so this is the discovery, also referred to as the discovery phase. And in this stage, scientists are investigating either in cell culture or in animal models, a lot of time mice or rats or non-human primates, and looking at the biological properties of that virus when it infects a susceptible host. And once they have identified candidate vaccines that have some potential to be protective against infection by the target virus, they then move on to phase 1 trials. And in phase 1 trials, these are usually conducted in a small population of people, somewhere on the order of about 10 to 20. And at this stage, what scientists are investigating is what is the right dose to administer to an individual, and how safe is that treatment? Does it cause any type of adverse events? And once a candidate has successfully passed phase 1 trial, it is now ready to progress into phase 2 trials. And in phase 1 trials, it's important to note that about 30% of the candidates that progress from preclinical testing into phase 1 trials actually never make it out of phase 1 trials and are considered failures. So when we move on to phase 2 trials, the number of people that are being tested in this stage is usually on the order of several hundred. And at this stage, we're looking for a side effect of the medication or the vaccine, and also how effective it is at preventing our target. And in this case, approximately 67% of the candidates that make it into phase 2 trial fail and are not continued on into phase 3 testing. Phase 3 testing is a larger scale trial, and this is usually conducted at multiple sites, so in multiple states, sometimes in multiple countries. And this is a longer study, and at this stage we're looking at a larger population, which allows us to determine if there are any events that are due to specific individuals. So this, usually in phase 3 stage, it would allow us to identify any side effects that are linked or related to some small percentage of the population, which wouldn't be uncovered in phase 2 trials, given the smaller size of those. And at this point, approximately 70 to 75% of the candidates that progress from phase 2 to phase 3 trials actually fail at this stage because they generate some rare side effects. And then anything that makes it past phase 3 trials is now ready to go through the final approval process and ready to be scaled up for production. And so in order for a vaccine to be ready for the general public, it has to go through all of these phases and preclinical testing until it is ready to be approved by the FDA and deemed safe and effective for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19 disease. And so if we look at the timeline to try and figure out how long it would normally take for a vaccine to be developed, and so if we started looking for a vaccine against COVID-19 disease in 2020, and we would have to wait till somewhere around the order of May, the middle of 2036, so somewhere in the order of about 16 years for a vaccine against COVID-19 to be developed. And you'll notice if we kind of break this down into the phases I previously talked to you about, and then moving on to the phases that actually gets it ready for production, you'll see that most of the time is spent in this discovery and preclinical phase. So between preclinical studies, also including academic research, you see you're spending the most time. The trials that you're investigating that we talked about, where you're actually moving into humans and looking at the safety and efficacy, those take approximately 4 years to get through all of those trials. And then another long phase is actually the preparing for the manufacturing of this vaccine. So building the right factories and facilities in order to be able to produce enough of the vaccine to be able to administer to the entire population. So build the facilities to make the vaccine, then you actually start the production, which is the manufacturing phase. And then once you have done that, you're ready for the approval phase and the distribution phase. And so you'll see that most of the time, again, is spent in preclinical and then also preparing for production. So we can shorten, and we have successfully shortened the preclinical and discovery phase because scientists were able to use some of the information that they had learned from previous coronavirus infections like SARS and MERS. And so they were able to build off of that research to then start to look at what would work for COVID-19. And they are now in parallel conducting academic research and preclinical testing and phase 1 trials. And so with just shortening this discovery phase, you see that we've decreased the timeline from the middle of the year in 2036 down to April 2032. And so there are additional programs in place to try and accelerate the development of the vaccine even faster, and this is referred to as Operation Warp Speed. It is a collaboration between governmental agencies as well as private industry to speed up the production and the availability of a vaccine for COVID-19. And it's still going to have to go through all these phases, but these phases have been condensed, and I'll walk you through what I mean when I say the phases have been condensed. So they are now using a lot of the research that's already been done for SARS and MERS, and so they've developed some candidate vaccines. Those candidate vaccines are now being tested in phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 trials that are almost running in parallel. So there's no longer a need to wait for the end of the phase 1 trial to progress to the phase 2 trial, and then wait for the end of the phase 2 trial to progress to the phase 3 trial. These are being run in semi-parallel. And as long as they are deemed safe at the end of the phase 3 trials, then they will start production. Also, some companies are hedging their bets and moving ahead with the modification and the building out of the factories to make these viruses. So they are, in some circumstances, relying on facilities that have already been built and just doing modifications to those facilities. And they are also, in some cases, starting the manufacturing process while they are still in phase 3 trials, with the hope that anything that's successful in phase 3 trials that they have already started manufacturing will be ready for the approval and distribution process shortly after getting positive phase 3 results. And so some of the other things that have been put in place is that the FDA approval process has been fast-tracked. So anything that is deemed successful will be able to be distributed faster than it normally would. And so now we've moved that original timeline for a vaccine from about the middle of 2036. And on this timeline, the earliest that we could see a vaccine is August 2021. But we know that this timeline has been condensed even further because we are already in phase 3 trials for some of the vaccine candidates. And so 3 of those vaccine candidates are doing concurrent phase 2 and phase 3 trials. One company is Moderna in partnership with the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH. Another company is Morningside in partnership with the Imperial College of London. And then there is a partnership with 3 biotech companies led by Pfizer. And so this Morningside Imperial College of London partnership initially was the furthest along because they had already started investigating vaccines against SARS and MERS, and Moderna soon followed suit when they were able to produce an effective vaccine using a platform that they had also developed for SARS and MERS. And Pfizer has kind of moved ahead of these other 2 companies with regards to building the facilities and beginning production. So once they finish phase 3 trials, they will be ready to distribute their vaccine likely sooner than these other 2. And what I wanted to return to is the vaccine platform that these companies have decided to use. They're all using a nucleic acid platform where they have taken a specific part of the genome that codes for the spike protein, which is important for entry of the virus into host cells, and they are using that as their platform to vaccinate. And so just to summarize, we know that the timeline for the development of a COVID-19 vaccine is moving at an unprecedented speed. And part of this is due to the establishment of the Operation Warp Speed, which allows for fast tracking not only of testing but also of approval. And we know that we were able to reach to this stage because scientists were able to design candidate vaccines based on research that they had already gathered from previous SARS and MERS outbreaks. And we could potentially, if all goes well, and these 3 candidates that are currently in phase 2, phase 3 trials are successful, there could be a vaccine for the general population potentially by the end of the year. If companies start and continue to produce the vaccines prior to the end of the phase 3 trials. And with that, I will end the presentation.